poor girl with her little brother looks at a snack in a trash can and asks the young billionaire, "Do you think this is still good to eat? We're starving." And when he hears this, he does something that changes everything. The clock in the corner of the screen read 7:42 p.m. when David finally closed the last file. He leaned back in the leather armchair and rubbed his tired eyes. At 40 years old, his face still retained a youthful appearance, although small wrinkles were beginning to form at the corners of his eyes, silent witnesses to countless meetings, negotiations, and decisions that had turned him into the successful businessman he was today. The glass tower where his office was located was practically empty at that hour. David put some documents in his briefcase, but instead of heading to the parking lot, he felt a different impulse. His apartment would be empty for a few more hours. Sarah had mentioned something about having dinner with a friend, and the idea of going home alone did not appeal to him. "I'll take a walk," he decided, grabbing his jacket. He took the panoramic elevator down, watching the city lights begin to dot the urban landscape. New York, London, Tokyo. It didn't matter. It was a large metropolis like so many others, where people like him built fortunes while others simply tried to survive. "Good evening, Mr. Roberts." The security guard in the lobby greeted him. "Good evening, Charlie. Is your daughter better?" "Yes, sir. The doctor you recommended was excellent. I don't know how to thank you." David smiled and made a dismissive hand gesture. Small acts of kindness were easy when one had money and connections. Sometimes he wondered if his good deeds were truly altruistic, or just a way to soothe some unconscious guilt over his success. The glass doors opened automatically, and the night breeze welcomed him. David loosened his tie and began walking aimlessly, just letting his legs guide him. Downtown pulsed with life, hurried people, cars, neon lights. It was the kind of scene that normally energized him, but on this particular night, David felt strangely disconnected from it all, like a tourist in his own life. Over the last 6 months, that feeling had become more frequent, an emptiness that grew silently despite all his achievements. The company prospered, the bank account swelled, and yet something was missing. Sarah had noticed the change. The previous week, during a rare breakfast together, she asked if everything was all right. "Of course," he answered automatically, "just tired." But it wasn't just tiredness. It was something deeper, harder to name. David and Sarah had been married for 6 years. In the beginning, it was like a modern fairy tale. He, the ambitious entrepreneur, she, the talented architect who redesigned spaces with the same ease she smiled. They fell in love fast and built a comfortable life together. In the first few years, they talked about having children as if it were natural, an obvious next step. But months turned into years. Tests, specialists, treatments. Hope gave way to frustration, then resignation. With no definitive diagnosis, just the cruel reality that some things simply don't happen just because we want them to. Over time, the subject was left behind. David dove deeper into work, Sarah into her projects. The wound never fully healed, but they learned to live with it. David turned onto a less busy street. Groups of young people chatted excitedly outside a bar. Couples walked hand in hand. A hurried mother dragged a small child by the hand. He watched the last scene longer than necessary. "Sir, can you help me?" A man approached, hand extended. David automatically took out some bills from his pocket and handed them over, without really making eye contact. A mechanical gesture from someone used to being approached. "Thank you. God bless you." David nodded and kept walking, thinking about the irony of that blessing. If there was any divine blessing, it certainly had curious ways. Some got too much, others too little. His thoughts were interrupted by his cell phone vibrating. It was Jackson and his partner, probably wanting to discuss the meeting with the Asian investors scheduled for the next day. David stared at the screen for a few seconds and then put the phone away without answering. Whatever it was, it could wait. The colorful lights of a commercial area caught his attention. The night was pleasant. and people were enjoying the restaurants and cafes with sidewalk tables. David felt hungry and considered stopping somewhere when something unusual caught his eye. Near a set of trash cans, behind a closed kiosk, there was movement. A small, furtive movement. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a stray cat. But then he saw clearly they were children. David stopped, confused. Two small children, alone, rummaging through a trash can. The older one, a girl with light hair, tried to reach something inside the container, while an even younger boy looked around with fearful eyes. For a moment, David hesitated. It wouldn't be the first time he had seen homeless people or children begging for money. In big cities, one learns to develop a certain emotional numbness. But something about these two was different. Perhaps the silent desperation, or simply the fact that they were so small. Before he realized it, he was walking toward them. "Hello," he said gently, keeping a respectful distance. The girl jumped, quickly positioning herself in front of the boy. Her large, blue eyes locked on David with a mix of fear and defiance. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, but there was a frightening maturity in her gaze. "We're not doing anything wrong," she spoke with a firm voice despite the slight tremor. "We're just looking for food that was thrown away." Her words hit David like a physical blow. He took a closer look at the children. Dirty, worn clothes, but not completely in rags. The girl wore a messy little bow in her hair. The boy clutched a plastic toy car, missing a wheel. They didn't look like children who had always lived on the street. "Are you hungry?" David asked, crouching a bit to their eye level. The little boy looked at his sister, as if asking permission to answer. She remained firm. "We can manage on our own," she replied, but her voice faltered when the boy's stomach growled audibly. David smiled kindly. "I was thinking of getting something to eat. There's a diner on the corner. Would you like to join me?" The girl bit her lip, visibly torn. The boy tugged on her sleeve, whispering something. "Luke's really hungry," she finally admitted. "He hasn't eaten since yesterday." "My name's David," he introduced himself. "And you?" "Lily," the girl answered, still cautious. "And this is my brother, Luke. He's 3, I'm 5.5. The way Lily announced her age, with the half so important, made David feel a pang in his chest. 5 years old, already protecting a younger brother on the streets. "Nice to meet you, Lily and Luke. How about we go eat? You can choose anything you want." This time, even Lily couldn't hide the hope that flashed in her eyes. The diner wasn't fancy, one of those places with stools at the counter and Formica tables, but it was clean and warm. A middle-aged waitress served them, casting curious glances at the unusual trio. "What would you like to eat?" David asked. "Anything," Lily replied. "We're not picky." The forced maturity in her childish voice contrasted painfully with her small, dirty hands clutching the menu as if it were a treasure. "How about burgers, and fries, and milkshakes?" David suggested. Luke's eyes lit up in a way that said it all. Lily tried to maintain composure, but a small smile escaped. While they waited for the food, David tried to chat casually with the children. He discovered that Luke hardly spoke, not because he was unable, Lily assured him, but because he was shy around strangers. "Do you live around here?" David asked, trying to sound casual. Lily's smile disappeared. "We lived with Grandma, but..." David prompted gently. "She disappeared," Lily answered in a low voice. "She went to buy medicine and never came back. We waited many days." "And your parents?" "Mommy became a star," Lily said, looking at the ceiling as if she could see beyond it. "Grandma explained that very good people become stars in the sky when they go away." David felt a lump in his throat. "And your dad?" Lily shrugged. "We never met him." The food arrived, momentarily interrupting the conversation. The children looked at the plates with a mix of fascination and disbelief. Luke immediately grabbed a French fry and devoured it. Lily, always the protector, cut her brother's burger into smaller pieces before touching her own food. While the children ate with the abandon of those who haven't had a decent meal in a long time, David watched, deep in thought. The scene before him seemed unreal. In the 21st century, in one of the richest cities in the world, 2 children starving on the streets. And until that day, he had encountered similar situations without truly seeing them. "Do you have somewhere to sleep tonight?" he asked when they were almost finished. Lily looked up, suddenly alert again. "We have places," she replied vaguely. "Safe places," David insisted. The girl did not answer, but her silence said it all. David thought about offering them his home, but he hesitated. He didn't know these children. He knew nothing about them beyond what Lily had told him. Bringing strangers home, even children, was not a decision he could make alone. There was Sarah to consider, and legal implications. What if the authorities accused him of kidnapping? What if the children had relatives looking for them? "Have you looked for help?" "There are places that can take care of you," he suggested, thinking of shelters or social services. Lily's face closed off immediately. "They'd split us up," she said with frightening certainty. "I've seen it happen to other kids. Luke needs me." The silence that followed was heavy. David knew he should call the police or social services. That was the correct, responsible procedure. But the fear in Lily's eyes made him hesitate. He ordered dessert, ice cream for the kids, coffee for himself, trying to buy time to think. While Luke savored his ice cream with childish abandon, Lily watched David with a mixture of gratitude and caution. "You were very kind," she finally said, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "I never thought anyone would stop to help us. People always walk right by, pretending they don't see us." The simplicity of her observation hit David hard. How many times had he himself walked right by, pretending not to see people in need? How many Lilies and Lukes existed on the streets, invisible to people like him? The waitress brought the bill, and David paid absent-mindedly, still absorbed in his thoughts. As they got up to leave, Lily promptly took Luke's hand, like a miniature mother. "Where are you going now?" David asked, reluctant to let them go. "We have a place," Lily answered vaguely. "Near the park." David checked his watch. Almost 9 p.m. Sarah would be arriving home soon. He needed to make a decision. "Look, I can't take you home with me tonight," he said finally, feeling guilty when he saw Luke's brief glimmer of hope fade. "But I want to help. How about we meet here tomorrow? I'll bring clean clothes, and we can figure out what to do." Lily studied his face for a long moment, her blue eyes surprisingly penetrating for someone so young. "Are you really coming back?" she asked, doubt evident in her voice. "I promise," David replied, realizing he truly intended to keep that promise. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m., right here. I'll be waiting." He took out his wallet, hesitated, then handed Lily a few bills. "So you can find a place to sleep tonight," he explained. "Maybe a motel." Lily looked at the money suspiciously, but accepted it. "Thank you," she said simply. Before they left, David wrote his phone number on a napkin. "If you need anything before tomorrow, call. There are payphones around." Lily tucked the paper carefully into her pocket. "We'll be here tomorrow," she promised. David watched them walk away, 2 small figures in the urban night. Luke looked back once, waving timidly. Lily did not look back, her rigid, protective posture carrying a weight no child should bear. As he walked home, David felt restless. Had he done enough? Should he have insisted more, taken the children to some authority? Or should he have offered his home, despite the complications? The truth was that meeting Lily and Luke had stirred something inside him, something that had lain dormant, anesthetized by years of routine and comfort. A sense of purpose, maybe, or simply the ability to truly care. When he arrived at the apartment, Sarah was already there, reading on the couch. "You took a while," she remarked, looking up from her book. David hung up his jacket and sat down next to her. "Something strange happened today." "Strange how?" He hesitated, trying to find the right words. How to explain the impact of those two children on his life, even after such a brief encounter? I found two kids going through the trash for food, he began slowly. Orphans, apparently. A girl about 5 and a boy about 3. I took them to get something to eat. Sarah set her book aside, her green eyes attentive. And then nothing. I gave them money for a motel and arranged to meet them tomorrow. You didn't call the police or social services? No, David admitted. The girl, Lily, was terrified at the idea of being separated. Sarah studied him for a moment. You want to help them, she said at last. It wasn't a question. Yes, David replied, surprised by his own certainty. I want to help them. That night, lying in bed next to Sarah, David couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Lily and Luke, wondering if they were safe, if they had found somewhere to stay, wondering if they would return to meet him the next day. He also wondered about the emptiness he had been feeling, as though, despite all his success, something essential was missing. Something he might have finally started to find that night, in a chance encounter with two homeless children. David turned the key in the lock and entered the apartment. The usual silence was broken by Sarah's voice coming from the kitchen. David, is that you? Yes, it's me, he replied, hanging his jacket on the entryway rack. Sarah appeared in the hallway, holding a wine glass by the stem. She was wearing yoga pants and a loose t-shirt, her relaxation uniform after a long day of work. At 35, she retained the natural elegance that had attracted him from the first time they met, 6 years earlier. You took a while, she commented, approaching for a quick kiss. Everything okay? You seem tired. David hesitated. How to explain what had happened, how to describe the impact of those two children on his life, even after such a brief meeting. Something happened today, he began, following Sarah into the living room. Something unexpected. Sarah sat on the sofa, gesturing for him to join her. Her eyes, always so attentive, studied his face with growing concern. You're worrying me a little, she said. Is it something at the company? No, it's not work. David sat down, leaning slightly forward. After I left the office, I decided to walk around downtown. I ended up seeing two kids rummaging through a trash can, looking for food. Sarah's face twisted in shock. My God. A girl about 5 and a boy about 3, Lily and Luke. David paused, the image of the children still vivid in his mind. I took them to eat. They were starving, Sarah, days without a decent meal. Where are their parents? The mother died. Lily said she became a star. And the father, from what I gather, he was never in the picture. They lived with their grandmother until she disappeared a few weeks ago. They got evicted and have been on the streets since then. Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. Alone on the streets. 2 children that small. David nodded, feeling again that tightness in his chest that had been with him since the encounter. I should have called the police or social services. I know that's the official procedure. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. But Lily was terrified when I mentioned authorities. She's afraid they'd be separated. And you let them go? Sarah asked, no accusation in her voice, just curiosity. I gave them money for a motel and promised to meet them tomorrow at the same place. I gave them my number in case they needed anything before then. Sarah was silent for a moment, taking it all in. What do you plan to do tomorrow? She finally asked. It was the same question David had been asking himself since he said goodbye to the children. What was he planning to do? How far was he willing to go? I'm not entirely sure, he admitted. I thought about buying them new clothes, maybe taking them to a doctor. Make sure they're healthy, fed, safe for a few days while I think of something more permanent. Do you believe them? Their story? Sarah asked, always the practical voice of reason. David considered, could Lily be lying? Of course it was possible. Street children sometimes invented stories to gain sympathy. But there was something about the way Lily protected her brother, the forced maturity in her gaze, the way Luke silently followed his sister's every move. No, he didn't think he was being deceived. "I believe them," he replied firmly. "These kids are really on their own, Sarah, and scared." Sarah took a sip of wine, thinking, "You know what surprises me about this whole thing?" she asked. "The fact that you stopped to help them. Not that you aren't kind, but normally I'd be too busy on the phone or thinking about my next meeting," David finished, without resentment. It was true, after all. "I don't fully understand what made me stop, but I'm glad I did." Sarah gave a small smile, reaching out to touch her husband's face. "So am I." That night, after dinner, Sarah suggested making a list of items to buy for the children. They started with the basics: clothes, shoes, toiletries, and soon they were adding children's books, educational toys, vitamins. "We're going overboard," David laughed, looking at the page-long list. "Maybe," Sarah admitted, "but if we're going to help, let's do it right." There was something in the way she said "we" that warmed David's heart, a silent reminder that he wasn't alone in this unexpected journey. Later in bed, while Sarah breathed softly beside him, already asleep, David remained with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Sleep seemed impossible. His mind swirled with questions, worries, possibilities. Where were Lily and Luke at that very moment? Had they managed to get a motel room like he suggested? Or were they under some bridge, trying to keep warm? Would they come back to meet him the next day? And if they did, what then? The practical side of him, the calculating entrepreneur, said he was getting in too deep already. Financial help was one thing. Emotional commitment was something else entirely. There were risks, complications, unpredictable consequences. But another part of him, a part he barely recognized, insisted that their meeting was not accidental, that maybe there was a greater purpose at play. David and Sarah had always wanted children. For years, they tried every available treatment, until repeated disappointments forced them to accept a reality different from what they'd dreamed. They briefly discussed adoption years ago, but the moment never seemed right. There was always the company to build, trips to take, goals to meet. And so, slowly, the dream of a family was tucked away in a drawer. Now, lying in the dark, David wondered if that drawer could be reopened. If perhaps those two vulnerable children could fill a void he no longer even realized existed. But how to know if they were ready, if they would be good parents, if the children would accept them, and how to navigate the legal maze that would surely be involved. David turned over in bed, trying to find a comfortable position. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:47 a.m. In a few hours he'd have to be up, ready for another workday. And then at 10 a.m., the meeting with Lily and Luke. He closed his eyes, trying to force sleep to come. But images of the children kept appearing. Lily, with her premature seriousness. Luke, with his tired but still bright eyes. Abandoned, vulnerable, resilient. When the alarm went off at 6:30, David was already awake. In fact, he doubted he'd slept more than a few minutes intermittently throughout the night. He got up carefully so as not to wake Sarah and went to the bathroom. In the mirror, he saw the result of the sleepless night: red eyes, unshaven beard, exhausted expression. While showering, he made a decision. He would go alone to meet the children. Sarah had mentioned an important meeting that morning, and he didn't want to pressure her to cancel. Also, he needed to assess the situation first, to understand better what he could offer Lily and Luke before fully involving Sarah. When he left the bathroom, Sarah was already in the kitchen, making coffee. She also looked like she'd slept little. "Good morning," she said, offering him a cup. "Ready for the big day?" David took the coffee gratefully. "I'll go by myself," he announced. "You've got that meeting with the Boston clients, right?" Sarah nodded, but there was hesitation in her eyes. "I can reschedule," she offered. "I'd like to be there to meet them." "There'll be time for that," David assured her. "First, I need to make sure they're okay, that they trust me enough. I don't want to scare them by showing up with a stranger." Sarah considered his reasoning and agreed. Makes sense, but call me as soon as you know anything. And David? She paused, holding her husband's hand. If we can do something more for these kids, beyond immediate help, we always dreamed of having children, right? The simplicity of her statement hit David hard. We always dreamed of having children. Yes, they always had. And maybe, in some unexpected way, that dream could still come true. Thank you, he said, squeezing her hand. It means a lot. Hours later, driving toward downtown, David tried to imagine how the reunion would unfold. Would Lily and Luke be there? Had they trusted him enough to return? And if they were, what would happen next? Traffic was heavy, typical of a weekday morning. As he waited at a traffic light, David glanced at the bags on the passenger seat. Clothes, shoes, simple toys, colorful books, practical gifts for children who might never have received presents. Was it enough? Probably not. But it was a start. A first step on a journey whose destination he still couldn't fully see. What he did know with a surprising certainty was that he couldn't simply turn his back on Lily and Luke now that he knew their story. Not knowing they were alone in the world, relying only on each other to survive. When he finally got near the diner, David felt his heart race. Whatever happened from that moment on would change his life forever. And strangely, that prospect no longer frightened him. David drove slowly through downtown, scanning each bench, each awning, each spot where children might take shelter. The diner where they had agreed to meet was empty, no sign of Lily or Luke. His stomach tightened. Had they disappeared? Had they simply taken the money and vanished like so many others on the city's streets? He parked and decided to search on foot. The day was overcast, threatening rain. David thought of the children exposed to the weather and quickened his pace. That's when he saw them. They were sitting under the awning of a closed store, a few blocks from the diner. Lily had a protective arm around Luke, who seemed to be dozing against her. They wore the same clothes as the day before, but David noticed they looked a bit cleaner. They had probably used the money for a bath somewhere. Lily spotted him first. Her eyes widened slightly, and David noticed the surprise. She truly hadn't expected him to come back. "Good morning," he greeted, keeping a respectful distance. "I was waiting for you at the diner." Lily straightened, gently waking Luke. "We got here too early and got cold," she explained. "It's sunny here in the morning." David looked at them more closely. Despite their obvious fatigue, they seemed a bit better than the day before. Luke rubbed his eyes sleepily but smiled when he recognized David. "Are you hungry?" David asked, already knowing the answer. Luke nodded vigorously. Lily shrugged, trying to maintain the facade of not needing help. "A little." "Let's have breakfast," David suggested. "Then I want to talk to you about something important." The diner was busier than the previous night. A group of workers sat at the counter, and some tables were taken by students with laptops. The waitress, the same as before, recognized them and smiled. "Back so soon?" she asked, guiding them to a corner table. David ordered a full breakfast for the three of them: eggs, bacon, pancakes, orange juice. While they ate, he tried to chat casually with the children, avoiding difficult questions. He wanted them to feel at ease. "Where did you sleep last night?" he finally asked, once the plates were nearly empty. "In a motel," Lily answered. "It was warm and had a big bathtub." "Luke took 2 baths," she added, a note of pride in her voice. "And we washed our clothes in the sink." David smiled. It was good to know they had used the money as he hoped. "Do you still have any money left?" he asked. Lily nodded. "A little. I saved it for emergencies." The forced maturity in that 5-year-old child continued to impress him. "Lily," David began, choosing his words carefully. "Luke, I have a proposal for you." The children looked at him intently, Luke with curiosity, Lily with caution. "Would you like to come to my house today? My wife, Sarah, is excited to meet you. We have an extra room, warm food, clean clothes. You could get proper rest." Luke's face lit up immediately, but Lily remained wary. "For how long?" she asked. The question caught David by surprise. He realized he hadn't thought about the details. For how long, really? One night? A week? Forever? "For now, let's say a few days," he answered honestly. "Time for you to rest, and for us to figure out the best way to help." Lily looked at her brother, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. David saw the internal battle in her eyes, her natural distrust clashing with her desire to provide comfort for her brother. "Will we be a bother?" she finally asked. David smiled. "Absolutely not. In fact, I think you'll make our house a lot livelier." The drive to David's house was quiet. Luke fell asleep almost immediately in the back seat, exhausted from lack of proper sleep. Lily stayed alert, watching the route they took, always ready to protect her brother if needed. David called Sarah during a stoplight, telling her he was bringing the kids. He could hear the excitement in her voice even through the phone. The car finally turned onto a tree-lined street in a quiet residential neighborhood. The houses were large, with well-kept gardens. David and Sarah's home was a two-story construction with big windows and a small porch at the entrance. "Is this where you live?" Lily asked, eyes wide. "Yes," David replied, parking in the driveway. "Come on, Sarah's waiting." As promised, Sarah opened the door before they even reached it. David observed his wife with renewed affection. She was clearly nervous, anxious to make a good impression, wearing a simple dress and her hair in a casual ponytail. "Hello," she greeted, her voice gentle. "You must be Lily, and this is Luke. I'm Sarah." Lily nodded politely. Luke, still groggy from sleep, hid partially behind his sister, peering at Sarah with curious eyes. Come in. You must be tired." Sarah stepped aside to let them in. "I made some snacks if you're hungry." The house was spacious and bright, decorated with a discreet elegance that reflected Sarah's taste. It wasn't a house designed with children in mind, no scattered toys, no safety gates or other typical childproofing, but it was welcoming in its own way. "Your house is really pretty," Lily commented politely, still firmly holding Luke's hand. "Thank you," Sarah smiled. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." She led them to the kitchen, where she had prepared sandwiches, cut fruit, and cookies. Luke immediately perked up at the sight of the cookies, looking to his sister for permission. Lily gave a slight nod, and he dove in. "You might want to take a bath and change clothes," Sarah suggested after they ate. "We bought some clothes we think will fit, but if they don't, we can get others." Lily's eyes widened. "You bought clothes for us?" Sarah smiled. "Of course, and some books and toys too." While Sarah took the children upstairs to see the guest room and the bathroom, David went to his office to make an important call. Helen Parker had been a social worker for 20 years and had helped David's company with some community projects. If anyone could advise them in this complicated situation, it would be her. "I need your guidance, Helen," he explained, after summarizing the situation. "I don't want to involve the official system yet if it means they could be separated." Helen sighed on the other end of the line. "I understand your concern, David. The truth is, our shelters are overcrowded, and siblings often end up in different facilities, especially with that age difference and genders." It was what David feared hearing. "What are our options then?" he asked. "You could request an emergency temporary guardianship," Helen suggested. "That would buy time to see if there are other relatives, to understand the situation better before making permanent decisions." "And what are our chances of getting that guardianship?" "It depends on many factors," Helen replied cautiously. "But you're financially stable, have an appropriate home, no criminal record. It's a good start." David thanked her and promised to keep in touch. When he hung up, he felt a weight on his chest. Even the most favorable option involved a complicated process with no guarantees. Upstairs, Sarah had just finished showing the guest room to the children. It was a neutral space with a double bed and minimal decor, clearly not designed for kids. But Sarah had improvised. Extra pillows created a barrier in the middle of the bed, forming separate spaces for Lily and Luke. Tomorrow we can arrange proper beds, she explained. But for tonight, I hope this will do. Lily ran her hand over the white, soft sheets, as if she had never seen anything so clean. Luke was already exploring the bags of gifts Sarah had left on a chair. "Look, Lily," he exclaimed, holding up a small red car. "Just like the one Grandma gave me." Lily smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen, and joined her brother in exploring the presents. There were basic clothes in approximate sizes, colorful children's books, a few simple toys bought in a rush that morning. "I'll let you settle in," Sarah said. "The bathroom is right there. There are clean towels, shampoo, soap, everything you need." When Sarah returned downstairs, she found David in the office, looking worried. "I spoke with Helen," he informed her. "If we go through the official system, they'll likely be separated." Sarah bit her lip. "We can't let that happen. She suggested we apply for an emergency temporary guardianship," David continued. "It would give us time to see if there are any relatives and to figure out the legal situation." Before they could continue their conversation, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Lily and Luke were coming down, hand in hand, transformed by cleanliness and new clothes. Lily's hair, now clearly blonde, was brushed and still damp. Luke seemed smaller without the grime and oversized clothes, but his eyes sparkled. "Are we bothering you?" Lily asked, ever cautious. "Of course not," Sarah smiled. "We were just talking about you. How to help you?" "Do we have to leave tomorrow?" Lily asked, her voice small, revealing for the first time the vulnerability she hid behind her mature facade. David and Sarah exchanged a look, one of those silent moments of communication that couples develop over time. They hadn't discussed details, long-term plans, implications, but in that instant, they both knew the answer. "No," David replied firmly. "We don't want you to go." The days that followed were an adjustment for everyone. Sarah improvised a proper room for the children. They bought 2 small beds, organized the toys, hung colorful curtains. They discovered that Lily loved children's books, devouring stories whenever she could. Luke, meanwhile, developed an immediate fascination with everything David did. "What's that?" he would constantly ask, following David around the house. "That's my laptop," David would patiently reply. "I use it for work." "And that?" "A special pen. See, it has my name engraved." The boy's insatiable curiosity was refreshing. David, used to the frenetic pace of business, found himself slowing down to explain simple things, answering basic questions, seeing the world through a 3-year-old's eyes. In the kitchen, Lily started helping Sarah prepare simple meals. Her motor coordination was impressive for her age. She carefully chopped fruit, gently stirred pancake batter, set the table with precision. "I used to help Grandma," she explained, when Sarah commented on her skill. Her hands hurt. Those small revelations about her past were rare and precious. Neither Lily nor Luke talked much about their life before the streets, as if they feared the memories might shatter the fragile peace they had found. In just a few days, a routine began to form. Sarah adjusted her work schedule to be more present at home. David did the same, turning down business trips and delegating some responsibilities. The joy the children brought was undeniable, but there were constant worries too. Their legal status remained uncertain. Every knock on the door made Lily jump, as if afraid someone was coming to take them away. The change in David was particularly noticeable. He, who had always measured success in closed deals and profits, now found himself counting small victories. Lily's first genuine smile at receiving a new book. Luke's progress learning to tie his shoes, the way both children were beginning to relax around them. On a Saturday afternoon, while Sarah prepared dinner, David was in his office reviewing some documents. A light knock on the door interrupted him. It was Luke, holding the little red car he now never let go. "David," the boy called timidly, "do you want to play cars with me?" Something about that simple request deeply moved David. The boy wasn't just asking for a playmate. He was asking for acceptance, connection, affection. "Sure," David replied, pushing the papers aside. Let's play. Sitting on the office floor, pushing a toy car and making engine noises to make Luke laugh, David felt something new awaken inside him, a protective instinct, fierce yet tender at the same time. The certainty that he would do anything to keep this child, these children, safe and happy. It was the same feeling he saw in Sarah's eyes when she combed Lily's hair, or checked that Luke was well covered at night. A feeling that needed no name to be recognized. Family. Not the one they had planned, not the one they had expected, but perhaps exactly the one they needed. Attorney Miranda Collins's office was exactly as David had imagined. Bookshelves from floor to ceiling, framed diplomas on the walls, an impeccably organized desk. Miranda herself, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, had a reputation as the best family law specialist in the city. "So you want to begin the process of provisional custody," she said after David and Sarah explained their situation, "and eventually adoption." "Yes," David confirmed. "The children have been with us for almost 3 weeks now." Miranda made a few notes. "The story you've told me is complicated. Children found on the streets, no documents, mother deceased, grandmother missing. No doubt they need a stable home, but the system has strict protocols for these cases." "Where do we start?" Sarah leaned forward. "We have to formalize the situation," Miranda replied bluntly. "At this moment, you have no legal rights over these children. Technically, you're housing minors without authorization." David felt a chill down his spine. They hadn't thought of it that way. "The first step is to apply for an emergency provisional guardianship," the lawyer continued. "That will legalize their presence in your home, while we investigate whether there are any interested relatives and clarify the situation before permanent decisions." "What if a relative appears?" Sarah asked, her voice slightly tense. Miranda took a deep breath. "Blood relatives generally have priority in the system. But there are exceptions, especially if we can show the children have already formed strong bonds with you, and that moving them would be harmful." David thought of Luke, who now ran into his arms whenever he got home from work, and Lily, who was starting to let down her guard and allow herself to be a child again. "What are our chances?" he asked. "It depends on several factors," Miranda answered honestly. "How long the children have been with you, the suitability of your family environment, the absence of any relative capable or interested. The judge will also consider reports from home visits and psychological evaluations." "Psychological evaluations," Sarah repeated, "of you and the children. It's standard in adoption cases." Leaving the office, David and Sarah walked in silence for a few minutes, processing everything they'd heard. The process would be more complicated and time-consuming than they'd hoped. Interviews, paperwork, home visits, searches for relatives, hearings. "What are you thinking?" Sarah finally asked. David hesitated. "I'm thinking about how fast all this happened. A month ago, it was just the two of us. Now we're consulting adoption attorneys and thinking about becoming parents. Scary, isn't it?" "Yes," David admitted, "but in a strangely right way." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I know. It's like Lily and Luke were the missing pieces in our lives, only we didn't know it until we found them." The next day, Helen Parker, the social worker, visited the house for a preliminary assessment. She spoke with the children, observed how they interacted with David and Sarah, examined the room they had prepared. "You're creating an excellent environment for them," Helen commented once the children went to play in the backyard. "But I have to be frank, the process won't be easy." "We're prepared," David assured her. "The system will try to locate any family members, uncles, cousins, even distant relatives. If we find someone, that person will have priority for custody." Sarah bit her lip. "And if no one is found?" "Then your chances improve considerably. But even then, there'll be background checks, financial verifications, psychological evaluations, interviews with people close to you, unannounced home visits." David felt the weight of the responsibility they were taking on. It wasn't just giving shelter to two vulnerable children. It was a permanent legal and emotional commitment. Was he ready? Fatherhood had never been part of his immediate plans, even in the years he and Sarah tried for children. It was always something for the future, for later, after the company stabilized, after they had more time, after... Now, there was no after. There were only Lily and Luke, two real children with real needs and real hopes. That night, while David worked in his office preparing the paperwork Miranda had requested, he heard a soft knock on the door. It was Lily, holding one of the children's books Sarah had bought. "Can I read here with you?" she asked timidly. "Of course," David replied, moving some papers aside to make room. Lily sat in the chair next to him, carefully opening the book. She still treated every new object like a precious treasure. "Auntie Sarah said this one is really good," Lily commented, pointing to the colorful illustrations. It was the first time Lily referred to Sarah that way. Auntie, a small sign of acceptance, of belonging. David smiled. "She has good taste in books." Lily flipped a few pages in silence, then looked at David with a curious expression. "Are you going to be our parents now?" The question, so direct and unexpected, took David by surprise. "We'd really like that," he answered honestly. "We're doing everything we can so that you can stay with us forever." Lily nodded, considering his answer. "Do you think it'll take a while before I can call Auntie Sarah Mom?" she asked, a mix of hope and uncertainty that tugged at David's heart. At that moment, Sarah passed by the open office door, carrying a basket of laundry. She stopped, clearly having heard the question. Her eyes met David's, brimming with sudden emotion. Lily watched Sarah, waiting for an answer. "There's no rush, sweetheart," Sarah finally replied, her voice slightly shaky. "You can call me whatever you feel comfortable with whenever you're ready." Lily smiled, apparently satisfied with the answer, and returned her attention to the book. Later that night, in their bedroom, Sarah broke down in silent tears. "I'm so scared, David," she confessed. "What if we can't get custody? What if someone comes to take them away?" David held her, feeling the same fear. "We'll do everything we can. It's all we can promise ourselves and them." It was an uncertain path ahead, full of legal and emotional hurdles. But when David considered the alternative, Lily and Luke in separate shelters, or back on the streets, he knew any battle was worth it. A month had passed since Lily and Luke arrived at David and Sarah's house. The changes were subtle but significant. The way Lily no longer compulsively checked the exits of each room, how Luke now hummed while he played, instead of maintaining that vigilant silence. Small signs that they were starting to feel safe. On a Saturday morning, Sarah was in the kitchen making pancakes when Lily appeared, still in pajamas, her blonde hair messy. "Can I help?" she asked, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Of course, dear sweetheart," Sarah replied, moving aside so the girl could have space. "You can stir the batter while I prepare the fruit." Lily nodded, climbing onto a step stool to reach the countertop. Sarah watched how she held the spoon firmly, stirring the batter with the intense concentration she gave to every task. "Mommy taught me to make pancakes," Lily said casually, not taking her eyes off the bowl. Sarah froze for a second. It was rare for Lily to mention her mother, as if those memories were too precious to share often. "Really? Was she a good cook?" Lily shrugged. "She didn't have much time. She worked a lot. But on weekends she made pancakes with little faces." "Faces?" Sarah smiled, slicing strawberries. "Yes, with banana and chocolate. Luke loved them." Lily paused, thoughtful. "Can I make one for him today?" "That's a great idea." While they prepared breakfast together, Sarah noticed how different Lily was from the guarded, defensive child she had first met. There were still moments of reserve, of course, especially around strangers, but trust was growing day by day. In the office, David was checking emails when he heard a familiar knock on his door, 2 quick taps, followed by one louder one. The secret code he and Luke had come up with. "Come in, buddy," he called, spinning his chair around. Luke came in happily, holding up a drawing. In recent days, He had become obsessed with dinosaurs after Sarah showed him a book about them. "I drew a T-Rex," he announced, handing over the paper. David examined the drawing with the seriousness he knew the boy expected. "Wow, that's really good. I especially like the sharp teeth." Luke smiled, revealing a new gap where a baby tooth had been. "Sarah said you'd like it." She was right. "How about we hang it on the wall with the others?" Luke nodded enthusiastically, following David to the bulletin board they had improvised on one office wall, now almost completely covered in colorful drawings. "David," the boy asked as they pinned the drawing, "do you like me coming here?" The question caught David by surprise. "Of course I do." "Why do you ask?" Luke shrugged, but there was insecurity in his eyes that tugged at David's heart. "Tommy's dad doesn't like him going into his office." David crouched down to Luke's eye level. "Well, every family has its own rules. In our family, I like when you come here." Luke's eyes lit up at the word family, a concept that was taking on new meaning for him every day. "Want to help me organize these papers?" David invited. "I need an assistant." Luke nodded seriously, clearly honored by the responsibility. In the afternoon, Helen Parker made one of her assessment visits. These visits were now regular, part of the guardianship process moving through the courts. "How are they adapting?" Helen asked, looking around the living room where toys coexisted harmoniously with the elegant decor Sarah had always valued. "Better than we expected," Sarah replied. "Lily is opening up more, mentioning her mother occasionally. Luke seems more secure, less startled by sudden noises." Helen took notes on her clipboard. "And how about you two? How are you adapting?" David and Sarah glanced at each other. It was a question they often asked themselves. "It's unlike anything we imagined," David admitted. "Definitely more chaotic. I've had to reorganize my schedule, delegate more at work. We hardly slept the first week," Sarah added with a smile. "We stayed up, alert to every sound, worried if they were okay, if they missed their old life. And now, David paused, searching for the right words. "Now I can't imagine the house without them." Helen smiled, satisfied. "I'm going to observe them interact for a bit, if you don't mind, part of the evaluation." In the backyard, Lily was showing Luke how to make a flower crown. Helen observed from a distance, noting how patient the girl was with her brother, how he looked at her with adoration, how both seemed more relaxed, more childlike. "What do you think of your new home, Lily?" Helen asked, and approaching slowly. Lily looked up, cautious as she always was with the social worker. "It's pretty, and warm when it rains." "And the people? Are Sarah and David good to you and Luke?" The girl considered the question with the seriousness that characterized her. "They don't yell, and there's always food. And," she paused, as if deciding whether to fully trust, "they really like us." The simplicity of that observation, the way it summarized all that truly mattered, made Helen smile. "And you, Luke? Are you happy here?" Luke, busy trying to fit a daisy into the crown, lifted his head. "David lets me help with his work, and Sarah tells really cool stories. And we have pancakes for breakfast." Later, during dinner, the family sat around the table. Sarah had made lasagna, and Luke was excitedly talking about the T-Rex he had drawn. "And David put it on his office wall," he exclaimed proudly. "That's wonderful," Sarah smiled. "Soon there won't be any space left on that wall." "I can draw smaller," Luke offered seriously, making the adults laugh. Lily, who had been quiet, suddenly said, "Thank you." Sarah looked at her, surprised. "For what, sweetheart?" "For the food. For the house. For not being on the street anymore." The simplicity of her gratitude, the raw honesty in the girl's words, hit Sarah like a wave. She tried to respond, but her voice faltered. Luke, sensing the emotional shift, added his own version of thanks. "Yeah, thanks. The street was cold, ma fine, and people gave us mean looks." David cleared his throat, equally moved, and placed a gentle hand on Luke's shoulder. "You don't have to thank us. We should be thanking you for being here." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat and smiled through the tears that threatened to fall. Just a few weeks ago, this table was a place of quiet meals, talk about work, practical plans. Now it overflowed with life, laughter, dinosaur stories, and flower crowns. The transformation wasn't just in the household routine or the rearrangement of rooms. It was something deeper, an alteration in the very meaning of what made up their home, their family. As she watched Luke try to cut the lasagna by himself, tongue sticking out in intense concentration, and Lily patiently explaining how to hold the fork better, Sarah felt a certainty that needed no words. Lily and Luke weren't just children they were temporarily helping. They were their children in the deepest and truest sense. The bonds formed each day, through pancakes with faces, dinosaur drawings, shared stories, and sincere gratitude, were stronger than any blood tie could be. "We still haven't heard anything about any relatives," Miranda Collins, the lawyer, said over the phone. "But the judge wants more time for investigation before granting provisional custody." David sighed, gripping the phone harder than he meant to. 2 months had passed since Lily and Luke had entered their lives. 2 months of forms, interviews, home visits, background checks. The bureaucracy felt endless. "How much more time?" he asked, trying to mask his frustration. "Impossible to say. This is an unusual case. Children found on the streets, no birth certificates located, just their account of a deceased mother and missing grandmother." David looked out the office window. In the backyard, Sarah was helping Lily and Luke plant flowers in small, colorful pots. The scene looked so natural, so perfect. How could he explain to a judge or social workers how much these children were already part of the family? Is there a real risk we could lose custody? The question that had plagued him for weeks finally escaped. There was a brief silence on the other end. "That possibility always exists, David. If a blood relative shows up interested in custody, the court will prioritize them unless there's a very strong case otherwise." After hanging up, David remained seated, watching his family in the garden. Luke, wearing a gardening hat far too big for him, was scattering dirt everywhere but in the pots. Lily, methodical as always, planted her seeds in perfectly aligned rows. Sarah laughed at something Luke said, her face shining with the joy the children had brought. In just 2 months, it felt as if they had always been a family. How could they bear it if someone showed up to take Lily and Luke away? That evening, after the children were in bed, a more difficult task than usual, with Luke quietly crying and Lily refusing to put down the book David had read to her, the couple sat in the living room, mentally exhausted. "Miranda says they're having trouble finding any official documentation on the kids," David told Sarah. "Not even birth certificates." "Is that good or bad for us?" Sarah asked, folding small clothes, a new part of their nightly routine. "I'm not sure. On one hand, it makes locating relatives harder. On the other, it complicates the legal process." Sarah placed one of Luke's small t-shirts on the pile. "Sometimes I feel like we're living in a bubble, building a family life that could burst at any moment. I know the feeling. I see how they're adapting, putting down roots. Lily is talking about signing up for ballet lessons. Luke talks about his birthday party, which isn't for months." Sarah paused, her voice trembling slightly. "And if we have to tell them they can't stay, how do we explain that?" David hugged his wife, feeling his own insecurities mirrored in her. "Let's not imagine the worst yet. We'll keep moving forward legally and hope the judge sees what we see, that the best place for them is here." The next day, while David was at work, Sarah decided to clean out the basement to create a play area for rainy days. Luke insisted on helping, carrying small items with the seriousness of someone on an important mission. "Can we make cookies afterwards?" he asked while struggling with a box almost bigger than he was. "I think that's a great idea," Sarah replied, grateful for the distraction. Sleepless nights worrying about the guardianship process were starting to take their toll. In the kitchen, Sarah guided Luke to add flour to the mixing bowl. The boy, overly enthusiastic, lifted the measuring cup with too much force, sending a white cloud into the air. In seconds, both were covered in flour, looking like ghosts. Luke froze, his eyes wide with fear that he'd done something wrong. Sarah looked at her own reflection in the kitchen window. White hair, a flour-streaked face, and began to laugh. It was a genuine, liberating laugh. Luke, realizing he wasn't in trouble, joined in, his childish laughter echoing through the kitchen. "It's like it snowed in here," Sarah exclaimed between giggles. "Sorry," Luke said, still laughing. "It's okay. Accidents happen. Now we have a funny story to tell David when he gets home." When Lily entered the kitchen a few minutes later, she found Sarah and Luke still covered in flour, laughing as they tried to clean up. "What happened here?" she asked, eyes wide. "A little flour accident," Sarah explained, attempting and failing to look serious. Lily stared at the scene for a moment, as if assessing the situation. Then, to Sarah's surprise, the girl dipped her hand in the flour and smeared some on her own cheek. "Now we're all ghosts," she declared, with a rare, radiant smile. For a moment, the constant worry lifted. Sarah saw only the present moment. 3 people covered in flour, laughing together in a sunlit kitchen. In that instant, there were no legal processes, no fears for the future, just the simple joy of togetherness. Later, after dinner, while David read a story to Luke, Sarah helped Lily organize her new colored pencils. "Do you like to draw as much as your mom did?" Sarah asked casually, knowing Lily had mentioned once that her mother used to draw for them on rare occasions. Lily nodded, lining up the pencils by color with her characteristic precision. "Mommy drew princesses for me, and cars for Luke. She must have been very talented." "She was," Lily replied with a child's absolute certainty, "but she was really tired after work." "Where did she work, sweetheart?" Sarah asked gently. It was rare for Lily to speak so openly about her mother, and each piece of information was like a small puzzle piece to help them understand the children's past. Lily looked up from the pencils, thoughtful. In a pretty building made of glass, she stayed there all day, sometimes at night too. Sarah felt a slight chill. A glass building. It could be any corporate office in the city, of course, but the description made her think immediately of David's company headquarters. Was it far from here? Lily shrugged. "I don't know. We took the bus when she had to take us with her." "And what did your mum do in that building?" "She cleaned," Lily answered simply. "She wore a blue uniform and carried a big broom. Sometimes they let us sit in a room while she finished work." Sarah felt a knot in her throat. Her cleaning lady, probably working long hours, perhaps without support, trying to raise 2 small children. The irony didn't escape her. While she and David tried unsuccessfully to have kids living in comfort, that woman was struggling to keep hers, likely under precarious conditions. "Did your mother ever talk about that building?" Lily's face lit up with the memory. "She said it was the prettiest building in the city, huge and all glass, shining when the sun hit it, like it was made of diamonds." The description was almost too poetic to ignore. Sarah made a mental note to mention it to David later. "Do you miss her a lot?" Lily lowered her eyes, returning to arranging the pencils. "Sometimes I dream about her. In the dream, she's looking for me, but she can't find me." The confession, so vulnerable and raw, broke Sarah's heart. She gently hugged the girl, feeling her stiffen for a second before relaxing into the embrace. "I'm sure she'd be very happy to know that you and Luke are safe and loved now." Lily didn't answer, but remained in the hug longer than usual. Later that same night, Sarah was awakened by a sharp cry coming from the children's room. She got up immediately, heart pounding, and ran down the hall. Opening the door, she found Luke still sound asleep. He could sleep through an earthquake, while Lily was sitting up in bed, silent tears streaming down her face. "Lily, sweetheart, what happened?" Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to touch the girl yet, respecting her space. "I dreamed about Mommy," Lily whispered, voice shaking. "She was calling me, but I couldn't reach her." Sarah felt her chest tighten. It was the same dream Lily had mentioned earlier. clearly a recurring theme in her nightmares. "It was just a dream, sweetheart. You're safe here." "I know," Lily replied, surprising Sarah with her lucidity despite the fear. "But there's a hole here," she pointed to her chest. "When I wake up and remember, she's not coming back." Sarah fought back her own tears. How to explain grief to a child? How to comfort her over a loss that would never be fully mended? "Can I hug you?" Sarah asked softly. Lily nodded and Sarah wrapped her in her arms. Slowly, she felt the small body relax against her. "You know that your mom will always be a part of you, right?" Sarah said after a few moments. "In the stories you remember, in the drawings you make, even in the way you take care of Luke. Those parts of her live on in you." Lily looked up, her eyes still brimming with tears but curious. "Really? Really? Nobody we love ever leaves us completely?" Lily considered that for a moment. "Do you think she would like you and David?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "I hope so," she answered honestly. "I hope she'd be happy to know we're taking good care of you." "She'd like you," Lily decided confidently. "Mommy always said good people were rare." Sarah stroked the girl's hair until she fell asleep again. Then she returned to her own room, where she found David awake, waiting. "Nightmare?" he asked. Sarah nodded, sliding under the covers. "About her mother?" "It happens often, from what I understand." David extended an arm, and Sarah snuggled against him, feeling suddenly fragile. "David, I'm so scared," she whispered. "Scared of losing these children I already love like my own. Of watching them face another loss, another abandonment." "I know," he replied, holding her close. "I'm scared too. I've always wanted to be a mom," Sarah went on, the words spilling out as if they had a life of their own. "I dreamed about it for so long, and now that I finally feel like I am their mom, that we're building a family." Her voice faltered, and David finished the thought. "Now we're living in fear that someone will show up to take them away. I can't lose these kids, David, I can't." David had never seen Sarah so vulnerable, so openly frightened. She had always been the rock of the family, the calm strength in any storm. Seeing her like this, trembling against his chest, made him realize how deeply they had all invested emotionally in this new family dynamic. "We'll do everything in our power to keep them," he promised, wishing he could guarantee more. "Lily told me something interesting today," Sarah said after a few moments, trying to shift to a less painful topic. "About her mum." "What?" "It seems she worked as a cleaning lady in a tall glass building. Lily said it was huge and sparkled like diamonds when the sun hit it." David frowned, intrigued by the description. "A glass building? That could be anywhere." "Yes, but it got me thinking, what if it was your company? You have offices in several corporate buildings downtown." The possibility hadn't occurred to David, but now that Sarah mentioned it, it made sense. His main headquarters was indeed in a mirrored glass skyscraper, often praised for its modern architecture. "It's possible," he murmured, feeling a strange unease. "Tomorrow I can check the records of contract employees. If she worked for a cleaning company hired by us, there should be a record." "Mary," Sarah recalled. Lily once said her mum's name was Mary. The idea that Lily and Luke's mother might have worked in his own company, perhaps even crossed paths with him in the corridors without him ever noticing, gave David an uncomfortable feeling. How many other Marys went through his life daily, invisible in their struggles, hopes and fears? But it was only a remote possibility, he reminded himself. Probably just a coincidence. After all, glass corporate buildings weren't exactly rare in the city. David fell asleep with that description echoing in his mind, a building that sparkled in the sun like diamonds. A beautiful image that was hard to forget, especially from the imagination of a child who had already lost so much. The phone rang at exactly 9:15 the next morning. David was about to leave for the office, briefcase in hand, when Sarah answered. He paused upon seeing her expression change as she listened. "Yes, I understand," Sarah said, her voice controlled, but David sensed the tension. "What time today?" "Sure, we'll be here." When she hung up, Her eyes met David's, worried. "That was Helen," she said, referring to the social worker. "She's coming at 2 this afternoon. She said there's important news about the children's case." "Did she give any details?" Sarah shook her head. "She just said she needed to talk in person, and that it's urgent." The children were in the living room, absorbed in a cartoon. Luke, as usual, was totally focused on the screen, while Lily was drawing at the same time she watched. They looked so peaceful, so at home. "I'll cancel my meetings," David decided immediately. "Whatever this is, we need to face it together." The next few hours were fraught with silent tension. David and Sarah tried to keep the normal routine so as not to alarm the children, but they exchanged anxious looks whenever Lily and Luke weren't paying attention. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Lily, who had been helping Sarah fold clean towels, froze at the sound. The girl had developed a sort of sixth sense for detecting trouble, a result of her months on the streets. "It's just Helen coming to visit," Sarah said, trying to sound casual. "Why don't you go get Luke so we can eat those cookies we made yesterday?" Lily nodded, but her eyes showed she wasn't convinced. She left the room slowly, looking back once before disappearing down the hallway. David opened the door, greeting Helen with a forced smile. The social worker came in, carrying her usual folder and an expression that couldn't hide the gravity of the situation. "David, Sarah," she greeted them, taking the seat offered in the living room. "Thanks for seeing me on such short notice." "What happened, Helen?" David asked, getting straight to the point. Helen sighed, placing her folder on the coffee table. "We managed to locate a relative of the children, a great-uncle, their grandmother's brother." It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Sarah clutched David's hand instinctively. "Someone named Edward Miller," Helen went on. "He was found through old records. Apparently, he and his sister lost touch years ago, which explains why the children never mentioned him. And this man," Sarah took a deep breath before continuing, "he wants custody of the children." Helen hesitated. "He was informed of the situation. So far, he hasn't expressed formal interest, but he's requested more information about the case. By default, the court considers him a potential guardian, being the only living relative identified." "But he doesn't even know them," David protested. "The kids have been with us for months. We've cared for them, loved them. You can't just give them to a stranger just because they share some DNA." "I understand your frustration, David," Helen replied with the professional calm her years of social service had taught her. "But the law gives preference to biological relatives in these situations. The system assumes that keeping children with extended family is ideal." "When will we know?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "When he decides if he wants to take them or not." "The court scheduled a preliminary hearing for next week. Edward Miller has been summoned to appear. He'll either express formal interest or withdraw." David stood up, unable to remain seated. Anxiety pushed him to move, do something, anything to prevent his children from being taken. And if he decides he wants custody, do we have no chance? Helen chose her words carefully. "You certainly have a chance. The judge will consider the time the children have been with you. The bond formed, their emotional stability. But I'd be lying if I said it'll be easy. The legal preference for blood relatives is strong." A noise at the living room door made the 3 adults turn. Lily stood there, eyes wide, her expression a mix of fear and understanding. Behind her, Luke looked confused, holding a half-eaten cookie. "Is someone going to take us away?" Lily asked, her voice small but firm, her eyes locked on Helen. Sarah got up immediately, going toward the girl. "Lily, sweetheart, you're talking about someone taking us," Lily interrupted, taking a step back. "I heard you." Silence hung in the air for a moment. David looked at Helen, who nodded slightly, encouraging honesty. "They found a great-uncle of yours," David explained, crouching to Lily's eye level. "Your grandma's brother. Nobody knows yet if he wants you to live with him." Lily's eyes filled with barely contained tears. "We don't want to go," she declared. "We want to stay here." "Luke," sensing the seriousness even without fully understanding, dropped his cookie and clung to Sarah's leg. "Don't want to go," he whimpered. Sarah crouched, hugging Luke. "No one's going anywhere right now," she promised, looking at Lily too. "We're just talking about possibilities." Helen watched the scene with the professional eye of someone who has seen this scenario many times, but there was genuine compassion in her gaze. "Kids," she said gently, "can I talk to you for a minute?" Lily hesitated, but eventually nodded. Luke stayed attached to Sarah, but turned his face toward the social worker. "I know this is scary," Helen began, "but I want you to know that all the adults involved, including me, want what's best for you." "Staying here is what's best for us," Lily said with the conviction of a child who had grown up too fast. Helen gave a sad smile. "I'll do everything I can to make sure the judge understands how you feel. I promise." After Helen left, the house fell into a heavy silence. Luke wouldn't leave Sarah's side, following her everywhere like a shadow. Lily withdrew into herself, returning to the defensive posture of those first days. That night, after tucking in the children harder than usual, with Luke crying softly and Lily refusing to let go of the book David had read to her, the couple sat in the living room, emotionally drained. "What are we going to do?" Sarah asked, her eyes red from holding back tears. David shook his head. "Everything we can. Miranda will represent our case. We'll gather all the records, Helen's visitation reports, testimonies from the preschool about how well they're adapting. And if that's not enough," Sarah's voice broke. David had no answer. Instead, he got up at the sound of something in the hallway. It was Lily standing at the door in her teddy bear pajamas. "I can't sleep," she confessed. "Come here," Sarah said, opening her arms. To her surprise, Lily ran and jumped onto her lap. A gesture of surrender and trust, unusual for a girl who was always so contained. "I don't want to go," Lily whispered. "I don't want to meet this uncle. I don't want another house." David joined them on the couch, resting a hand on Lily's hair. "Lily, look at me," he said gently. When the girl lifted her face, he continued, "We don't know what's going to happen, and I can't promise something I'm not sure of, but I want you and Luke to know one thing. We won't give up on you. Ever. Promise." Lily's eyes searched for a certainty he couldn't fully offer. "I promise we'll fight with everything we have to keep our family together," David replied, choosing his words carefully to be honest without amplifying her fear. "And I promise that, no matter what happens, you'll always have a place in our hearts." Sarah hugged Lily tighter. "And I promise we'll do everything we can to make sure you and Luke stay together, no matter what." It was a promise they could make with absolute conviction. If the worst came and they lost the legal battle, they would at least make sure the siblings weren't separated. A fear Lily had voiced from day one. "Can I sleep here tonight?" Lily asked softly. "Luke's already asleep, but I can't." "Of course you can," Sarah replied, relieved to offer at least that comfort. As Lily finally drifted off between them on the couch, David and Sarah exchanged looks over the girl's head. No words were needed to express the silent pact they were sealing in that moment. They would do everything, absolutely everything, to keep the family they had built intact. The following week would be one of intense preparation, legal, emotional, practical. The house, which had found a peaceful routine, now lived under a cloud of uncertainty. Yet amid the fear, there was a fierce determination. David and Sarah knew what was at stake, not just the children's future, but their own as well. Because, in just a few months, the four of them had become inseparable, parts of a whole that could not be divided without leaving deep wounds in everyone. The day after Helen's visit, David arrived at his office earlier than usual. Worry about the upcoming hearing and the potential appearance of the great-uncle had kept him up most of the night. But there was another matter he couldn't shake. The glass building Lily had mentioned. "The building that sparkled like diamonds when the sun hit it," he muttered to himself, noticing how the morning sun did exactly that to the facade of his company, Roberts Enterprises, one of the largest real estate groups in the region. The The possibility that Mary, Lily, and Luke's mother had worked there, maybe even crossed paths with him, wouldn't leave his mind. Could it be an unimaginable coincidence, or one of those strange twists of fate? David turned on his computer and opened the Human Resources system. As CEO, he had access to all records, employees, consultants, contractors. He started by typing Mary in the search field, but realized the mistake immediately. There were dozens of Marys in the files. He needed more information. He called his assistant. "Jennifer, I need the full records from the cleaning company we've contracted over the last 5 years. Every employee assigned to this building, especially night shifts." Jennifer looked surprised at the unusual request, but nodded. "I'll ask the contracts department. It might take a few hours." "It's urgent," David emphasized. "I also need any incident reports, complaints, or requests from those cleaning crews. Anything at all." While he waited, David tried to focus on his regular work, but his mind kept returning to Lily and Luke, and to the idea that their mother might have worked there, invisible to him like so many other workers who kept the building running. At 11:23 a.m., Jennifer returned with a thick folder. "These are all the records from CleanPro Services, the company we hired," she explained. "Unfortunately, a lot of it is only in paper form, not digitized." David thanked her and asked not to be disturbed. He began sorting the documents by year and by shifts. He specifically looked for night shifts, based on Lily's statement about her mother working sometimes at night. After an hour of meticulous searching, he found it. In the list of CleanPro employees assigned to the night shift in 2021 to 2022, there it was. Mary Wilson, cleaning assistant, Sector 3B. His heart sped up. Wilson. Could that be Lily and Luke's last name? They had never mentioned it, and the official records the social worker was trying to find were still incomplete. He kept digging, now with a full name. In the time card logs, he found confirmation that Mary Wilson worked consistently for almost 2 years, often doing overtime. There were a few absences scattered here and there, usually followed by medical notes referencing care for a minor dependent. It was in the internal request archives that David found something more concrete. A request filed by Mary Wilson to the cleaning company manager, forwarded to the building administration. "I request authorization to bring my children, Lily, 4 years old, and Luke, 2 years old, during my night shift on April 17th and 18th, due to my inability to find a caregiver. I promise to keep them in the break room without disturbing the work environment." The request had been approved with a note, "Exceptionally authorized, must not become a recurring practice." David felt a wave of conflicting emotions, relief at confirming that this really was Lily and Luke's mother, anger at the bureaucratic coldness of the note, and deep, crushing guilt for never having noticed, never having known, never having helped. A woman had worked in his building for years, cleaning corridors, offices, and restrooms, often at night, occasionally bringing 2 small children because she had no one else to watch them. And he, who walked those same corridors every day, who worked late in his luxurious office, had never even noticed. He kept searching and found the final record for Mary Wilson, a termination letter for job abandonment dated about a year earlier. The letter mentioned that the employee had been absent for more than 5 consecutive days without justification, leading to automatic dismissal. A year ago, around the time Lily said her mother became a star. David closed the files, feeling physically sick. Lily and Luke had lost their mother, then their grandmother, and ended up on the streets, all while he carried on with his privileged life, unaware, just a few floors away. When he got home that night, David was visibly shaken. Sarah, setting the table with Lily's help, noticed immediately that something serious had happened. "Kids, why don't you go wash your hands for dinner?" Sarah suggested, giving her husband a worried look. When they were alone, Sarah approached him. "What happened? Is it news about the case?" David shook his head, his expression grim. "It's not about the great uncle. It's about Mary, their mother. In a quiet voice so the children wouldn't hear, David told her what he had discovered, that Mary Wilson had indeed worked as a cleaning lady in Roberts Enterprises for almost 2 years, how she sometimes brought the children with her during night shifts, and how she had been fired for failing to show up, likely when she got sick for the last time. "She was there, Sarah," he concluded, voice cracking, "working in my building, cleaning my corridors, while I walked past without ever noticing. Someone who needed help was right under my nose." Sarah took his hand. "David, you couldn't have known. There are hundreds of contract workers in those buildings." "That's exactly the point," he retorted, frustrated. "I should have known. I should have better policies for contract employees, paid more attention to the people who keep my business running. If I had noticed, if I'd done something." "We can't change the past," Sarah said softly. "But we can honor Mary's memory by caring for her children now." David nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I intend to do. Not just take care of them, but make sure they stay with us. I'm calling Miranda first thing tomorrow, telling her I want to speed up the adoption process, do whatever it takes." "What about the great uncle?" "We'll fight, with all we've got." Determination filled David's voice. "It's not just about what we want anymore. It's about what we owe Mary, and what we owe these children." Right then, Lily appeared in the doorway, watching them with her perceptive eyes. "You're talking about us again?" she asked bluntly, a habit she had picked up since the possibility of being taken away surfaced. David exhaled. "Yes, Lily, we were talking about you and Luke. And about your mother, too." Mentioning her mother immediately caught Lily's attention. "What about her?" David looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. They had agreed to always be honest with the children, within limits they could understand. "Remember when you told me about the pretty building where your mom worked? The one that sparkled like diamonds in the sun?" Lily nodded, suddenly alert. "I found out that your mom worked in my building, Lily, at the company where I work. She cleaned the offices, mostly at night, after most people had gone home." Lily's eyes widened. "Did you know my mom?" David felt a lump in his throat. "I never had that honor. It's a big building, lots of people, but I found records showing she worked there for a long time, and sometimes she brought you and Luke when she had no one to stay with you." Lily grew thoughtful for a moment. "There are chairs that spin around there," she said suddenly, "and a room with a coffee machine where we could stay." The memory, so specific and clear, confirmed everything. David felt tears welling up. "Was it wrong for me to tell you about that building?" Lily asked, noticing David's sadness. "You look upset." David immediately crouched down to her level. "No, Lily, not at all. You did nothing wrong. In fact, you helped me realize something very important." "What?" "That sometimes the most important people pass through our lives without us noticing. And now I have the chance to do something I should have done before, help you and Luke, the way I would have helped your mother if I had known her." Lily studied him for a moment with that unsettling maturity she sometimes showed. "Mommy would have liked you," she finally declared. "She always said kind people were rare." The simplicity of her statement moved David deeply. He hugged Lily, and to his surprise, she hugged him back firmly. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, David stayed in the darkened living room, looking at the photos now decorating the walls, Lily and Luke at the park, at the beach, blowing out the candles on a little cake they'd improvised when they realized Luke's birthday had passed unnoticed on the streets. "I'll fix this, Mary," he whispered into the silence. "I promise I'll take care of them the way you would have, no matter what it costs." The hearing with the great-uncle was scheduled for 3 days later. The anxiety in the household was palpable, but now there was also renewed determination. They weren't just fighting for themselves, for their desire to be parents. They were fighting to honor the memory of a woman who had worked tirelessly to raise her children, a woman who had gone unnoticed when she could have been helped. It was a debt David intended to pay, one way or another. The family court was an imposing building with cold marble walls and corridors that echoed every footstep. David adjusted his tie for the 3rd time as he, Sarah, and the children waited in the hallway. The hard wooden bench where they sat made the wait even more uncomfortable. Lily, wearing a blue dress chosen especially for the occasion, sat upright, hands folded in her lap like a little adult. Luke had, unable to contain his natural energy, swung his short legs, occasionally poking his sister. "Stop moving," Lily hissed. "Too serious for a 5-year-old. This is important." Luke pouted but obeyed momentarily before fidgeting again. David watched the interaction with a mix of amusement and anxiety. These children, who had entered his life so unexpectedly, were now the center of his world. And today, a stranger might try to take them away. Miranda Collins, the attorney, reviewed her notes with a focused expression. "Remember what we discussed," she said quietly. "Stay calm no matter what happens. Judge Wallace is known for prioritizing the children's emotional stability." Sarah nodded, although her tense face betrayed her emotional state. The last week had been a whirlwind since they learned that the great-uncle, Edward Miller, had officially requested custody of the children. "Edward Miller just arrived," announced Helen Parker, the social worker, hurrying over to them. Everyone looked up simultaneously. Walking down the hallway was a man around 60 with thinning grey hair, wearing a suit slightly too big for him, as if borrowed for the occasion. Next to him was a younger woman in glasses, looking serious, likely his lawyer, carrying a black folder. Lily immediately scooted closer to Sarah, seeking protection instinctively. Luke, not fully understanding the significance of this stranger, stopped swinging his legs and stared at the man curiously. The man stopped a few yards away, looking at the children with an expression hard to read. There was a faint recognition in his gaze, perhaps some family resemblance to his deceased sister or to Mary. "Is that them?" he asked his lawyer, who nodded. There was no attempt to approach, no gesture of affection or recognition, just that evaluating look, as if examining an item at auction. David stood and extended his hand, determined to remain civil. "Mr. Miller, I'm David Roberts." Miller hesitated briefly before accepting the handshake, giving a weak grip. "I hope we can keep the children's well-being our top priority, whatever the outcome," David added. Miller simply nodded without replying. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, and he moved to a more distant corner of the hallway. "Who is that man?" Luke asked, tugging on David's blazer sleeve. "He's a distant relative of yours," David answered honestly. "He knew your grandmother." "Is he gonna take us away?" Lily's voice was almost inaudible, but loaded with fear. Sarah knelt to Lily's eye level. "We're here to sort that out, sweetheart. The judge is going to listen to everyone and decide what's best for you and Luke." Lily nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on Miller, as if assessing a potential threat. A few minutes later, they were called into the courtroom. Judge Wallace, a middle-aged man with grey hair at the temples and sharp eyes behind thin-framed glasses, observed them carefully as they took their places. The room wasn't large, but its formality was intimidating. David felt Luke pressing closer, practically hiding behind his leg. "We're here to decide on the permanent custody of Lily and Luke Wilson," the judge began. "On one side, we have Mr. Edward Miller, the children's maternal great-uncle, and on the other, the adoption request by David and Sarah Roberts, who have held temporary care for about 5 months. The judge adjusted his glasses, reviewing the documents before him. "We'll conduct these proceedings in a way that causes the least discomfort to the children. Mr. Miller, I'd like to hear your reasons for requesting custody first." Edward Miller cleared his throat before speaking, appearing slightly uncomfortable with the attention. "Your Honor, these kids are my blood. My sister, their grandmother, looked after them until she died. It's my family duty to continue that care. Have you had contact with the children before?" the judge asked. "Not directly," Miller admitted. "My sister and I weren't close in recent years. We had family disagreements. I only heard about this situation when I was contacted by social services." "And how do you plan to care for the children, considering your work and home situation?" Miller hesitated. "I have a modest house, but it's enough," 2 bedrooms. They can share one. As for work, well, I'm about to retire from the factory where I've worked for 30 years. I'd have time for them. Miller's lawyer spoke up. Your Honor, the main point here is the blood bond, the natural family connection. It's a natural right for a direct relative to have priority over non-relatives with no blood ties. The judge nodded, making notes. But even to a layperson, the argument seemed devoid of emotional substance. When it was Miranda Collins's turn, her approach was entirely different. Your Honor, we're not questioning the value of blood ties, she began. We're talking about 2 children who have already suffered devastating losses, their mother, their grandmother, and then months of living on the streets. Children who finally found stability, security, and love. Miranda presented detailed reports from Helen Parker's visits, showing Lily and Luke's emotional progress since arriving at the Roberts home. She submitted statements from preschool teachers, records from the doctors who examined them, photographs of the family life they had built. These children don't just need a roof and food, Miranda continued. They need parents who love them unconditionally, who understand their specific traumas, who have already formed a trusting relationship with them. Mr. and Mrs. Roberts know their preferences, their fears, their specific needs. David noticed how the judge seemed particularly interested as he looked at the photographs, Lily at her brand new ballet class, Luke proudly displaying a drawing, the children at the beach, probably seeing the ocean for the first time. Helen Parker was called to testify, describing in detail the transformation she had witnessed in the children. When I first met them, they were extremely wary and defensive, especially Lily. Luke barely spoke and often had nightmares. Now, they play, laugh, express their needs and feelings. They finally feel safe. David testified next, recounting how he found the children rummaging through trash for food, how he initially hesitated, but felt an immediate connection. He spoke about discovering that Mary had worked in his company, and how that reinforced his commitment to giving her children a secure future. It's not just about responsibility, David concluded, emotion in his voice. These children have transformed our lives. They are our children in every sense that matters. The most impactful moment came when the children's psychologist presented her assessment. Lily clearly expressed her desire to remain with the Roberts, Dr. Peterson reported. When I asked if she wanted to live with her great-uncle, she showed clear signs of anxiety and fear, saying she didn't want to start all over again with someone she doesn't even know. The doctor continued, emotional stability is crucial for children who've experienced abandonment trauma. Removing Lily and Luke from the safe environment they've finally found could cause significant psychological harm, especially given they've already lost other caregivers. The judge listened carefully, making occasional notes. When the arguments concluded, he requested a moment with Lily in his chambers, accompanied only by the psychologist. Luke, deemed too young for such an interview, stayed with Sarah and David. The minutes that followed were the longest of David and Sarah's lives, sitting side by side, holding each other's hands tightly. They exchanged looks of worry and hope. Luke, not fully grasping the seriousness, flipped through a picture book Sarah had wisely brought, glancing at the door every so often. Edward Miller sat by himself, displaying no particular anxiety. At one point, David caught him checking his watch. That small gesture spoke volumes, David thought. For Miller, this seemed like an obligation, not a child to fight for. When the judge returned with Lily, she immediately ran to Sarah's side, clutching her hand tightly. A good sign, David thought. The judge resumed his seat and, after a moment, organizing his papers, looked out at the room. After considering all testimonies, reports, and above all, the best interest of Lily and Luke, he began, I am granting full adoption rights to Mr. and Mrs. Roberts. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah stifled a sob, squeezing Lily's hand. David felt as if a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Even Luke, despite his limited understanding, sensed that something important had happened. Mr. Miller, the judge continued, while I acknowledge your blood relationship to the children, I see no evidence of an emotional bond or conditions that surpass the stable environment they have already found. The children appear to be fully integrated and secure in their current home." Miller nodded, showing little disappointment. "Understood, Your Honor," he said, standing up. He glanced at the children briefly, gave a curt nod, and left the courtroom without another word. "We get to stay with you?" Luke finally asked, realizing what was at stake. "Yes, my love," Sarah replied, tears now flowing freely. "You're staying with us forever." Lily, usually so reserved, suddenly threw herself into Sarah's arms, hugging her tightly. At the same time, Luke ran to David, who lifted him up, feeling the little body relax completely, as though finally releasing a breath he'd been holding. Miranda approached, smiling. "Congratulations, Roberts family." "Roberts Wilson," David corrected. "We're including their mother's last name with ours." As they left the courthouse, the sun was shining brightly, as if joining them in celebration. Luke bounced ahead, his childlike energy finally unleashed after hours of restraint. Lily walked between David and Sarah, holding both their hands, a rare smile illuminating her face. 6 months later, the Roberts Wilson home was a completely transformed place. What had once been an elegant but somewhat sterile environment was now vibrant, with drawings on the walls, toys occasionally scattered around, and the constant sound of children's voices. Lily, now almost 6 years old, had discovered a passion for books that Sarah eagerly nurtured. The previously serious and defensive girl now smiled more often, especially when immersed in stories of brave princesses and magical adventures. Her ballet lessons had become the highlight of the week. Luke Keane, who had just turned 4, followed David everywhere, helping with tasks like organizing tools in the garage or watering plants. "I'm your assistant," he would declare proudly, carrying screwdrivers twice the size of his hands. His curiosity was boundless, and his vocabulary grew by the day. Sarah had reduced her professional commitments to devote more time to motherhood, something she found more fulfilling than any architectural project ever had. Watching Lily slowly overcome her traumas and Luke blossom into his playful personality was for her the greatest achievement possible. David, profoundly changed by the experience, had launched a project called the Sunlight Foundation, a program dedicated to supporting single-parent families in vulnerable situations, especially working mothers. The foundation offered free daycare, medical care, legal aid, and scholarships. "We can't change Mary's past," he explained to Sarah when he presented the idea, "but we can try to make sure other Marys have the support she never got." One of the foundation's first initiatives was setting up a daycare in the very building of Roberts Enterprises, available to employees and contract workers with flexible hours to cover night shifts. "No one should have to choose between working and taking proper care of their children," David declared at the opening. David also instituted changes within the company: fairer wages for contract workers, extended benefits, flexible hours for parents. "It's not just a moral decision, it's also strategic," he explained to shareholders who questioned the costs. Well-cared-for employees are more productive and loyal. On a peaceful Saturday afternoon, David passed by Lily's room and stopped, quietly watching from the doorway. The girl was focused on drawing, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration, a habit that never failed to make him smile. "What are you drawing, Princess?" he asked, stepping into the bright, colorful room that used to be an impersonal guest room. Lily held up the paper proudly. It was a simple but touching drawing, 2 large hands holding 2 small hands. Below it, in her careful childish lettering, she had written, "They found us when we weren't even looking anymore." David felt a surge of emotion in his throat. "It's beautiful, Lily. It's our family," she explained seriously. "Before, we didn't have anyone else. We thought we'd be alone forever. But then you guys found us." "Actually," David replied, sitting beside her, "I think we all found each other, exactly when we needed to." Lily considered that for a moment, then nodded. "Mommy would like that," she said softly. She always said things happen for a reason, even when we don't understand it at the time. David hugged his daughter, thinking of Mary, a woman he had never met, but who was now woven into his life in ways he never imagined. He thought of how his world, once so focused on business and material success, now revolved around moments like this. Later, in the living room, the family gathered for their Saturday game night, a tradition they had established. Lily chattered excitedly about new books she wanted to read, while Luke played on the rug, building a tower with colorful blocks. Sarah watched the scene while preparing hot chocolate in the open-plan kitchen, exchanging amused glances with David each time the children burst into laughter. David took it all in with a deep sense of gratitude. He had chosen the path of caring and responsibility, and that choice had transformed not just the lives of 2 homeless children, but his own as well. He had finally discovered that true success wasn't measured in signed contracts or buildings erected, but in little hands that held his with trust, in children's eyes that looked at him with unconditional love. In that simple room, filled with children's laughter and board games, David Roberts Wilson found something all his business achievements had never given him: a true home, a complete family, a purpose greater than himself.